A man's greatest gamble isn't in the boardroom. It's the one he makes on his wife's silence. For Ethan Blackwood, tonight was the ultimate bet. He was walking into the most important gala of his career, held at the opulent Grand Serafina Hotel, with his beautiful young mistress Sophia on his arm. His wife Eleanor was at home, a forgotten piece of a life he was eager to upgrade. He believed he was the king of his own world, the master of his destiny. But what happens when the castle you're showing off doesn't belong to you? What happens when your quiet, unassuming wife holds the keys to the entire kingdom? Stay with me, because this isn't just a story of infidelity. It's a tale of a spectacular downfall, where the truth arrives in a designer gown and changes everything in a single heartbeat. The Blackwood residence in the manicured suburbs of Chestnut Hill was a monument to modern ambition. It was a house of clean lines, cold marble, and vast panes of glass that looked out onto a perfectly landscaped yet sterile garden. It was Ethan's pride and joy, a tangible symbol of his ascent. He was Ethan Blackwood, Senior Vice President at Innovate Dynamics, a man who by all outward appearances had meticulously crafted a perfect life. Tonight, the silence in the cavernous dining room was heavier than usual. Ethan adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke tuxedo, the fabric a whisper of expensive silk. Across the polished mahogany table, his wife Eleanor Vance picked at her salad. She was beautiful in a way he had stopped noticing, like a piece of classical art that becomes mere wallpaper over time. Her grace was quiet, her intelligence subtle. In the early years of their marriage, he had found that quietness alluring, a calm harbor for his raging ambition. Now he just found it dull. "You're sure you don't want to come?" He asked the question, a mere formality, a box to be ticked on the checklist of feigning concern. "It's the Vanguard Awards. It's a big night for the company." Eleanor looked up, her eyes the color of a stormy sea, holding a flicker of something he couldn't decipher. Sadness. Resignation. "I told you, Ethan. I have that deadline for the library proposal." Besides, she added, a small, sad smile touching her lips, "These events aren't really for me. You shine so brightly, I'd just be in your shadow." He pretended internally at her words, taking them as the compliment they were intended to be. It was true. He did shine. He was dynamic, charismatic, a shark in a world of minnows. Eleanor, with her love for old books, architectural sketches, and quiet evenings, was an anchor. A lovely, respectable anchor, but an anchor nonetheless. "All right, darling. Just don't work too hard," he said, his tone dismissive. He stood up, grabbing the keys to his Jaguar from the crystal bowl by the door. "I'll probably be late. Lots of networking to do. Harrison is expecting me to close the deal with the Japanese investors tonight." "Of course," she said softly, her gaze dropping back to her plate. "Be brilliant." He didn't see the way her hand trembled slightly as she placed her fork down. He didn't notice that her plate was still full. He was already gone, his mind miles away, buzzing with anticipation. He wasn't just thinking about the investors or the award he was certain he would win. He was thinking of Sophia. Sophia Jensen. She was 26, a firecracker in the marketing department at Innovate Dynamics. She was all vibrant energy, ambitious hunger, and wide-eyed admiration for him. She saw him not as the man who sometimes forgot to take out the recycling, but as the titan of industry he saw himself as. She made him feel like the man he was supposed to be, not the man who had married the quiet, unassuming daughter of a moderately successful architect. He had told Sophia his marriage was a hollow shell, a prison of polite obligation. He painted Eleanor as a passionless, unsupportive woman who was content to live off his success without contributing anything to his drive, and Sophia, enamored and ambitious herself, believed every word. As he drove away from the silent, glass-walled house, his phone buzzed. A message from Sophia. "Can't wait to see you, superstar. I'm wearing a red dress, the one you love." A genuine smile, the first of the evening, spread across Ethan's face. He pressed the accelerator, leaving his old life behind in the rearview mirror, speeding toward the glittering promise of the new. He felt no guilt. He felt only the exhilarating, intoxicating thrill of having it all. He was Ethan Blackwood, and tonight the world was his to conquer. He had a brilliant career, a beautiful mistress, and a stable, quiet wife at home. It was in his mind, the perfect arrangement, a testament to his own cleverness. He had no idea that the foundation of his perfect world was built on sand, and the tide was about to come in. Sophia Jensen was waiting for him in the lobby of the Langham, a boutique hotel downtown where they always met. When she stood up, the red dress was everything he had imagined. It was a slash of crimson against the muted tones of the lobby, a bold statement of intent. It clung to her curves, a siren's call that made heads turn. Her blonde hair was styled in glamorous waves, and her smile was dazzling. She looked like she belonged in the spotlight. "Wow," Ethan breathed, his appreciation genuine. "You look like a movie star." "I wanted to look perfect for your big night," she said, her voice a seductive purr. She looped her arm through his. "Are you ready to blow them all away?" "With you on my arm. They won't know what hit them." He boasted, his ego swelling. This was the part of the fantasy he loved most. With Sophia, he was reborn. He wasn't just a husband playing a role. He was a powerful, desirable man, taking what he wanted. He had spun a meticulous web of lies to keep his two worlds separate. To Sophia, Eleanor was a cold, distant figure who hadn't shared his bed in years. He'd told her they were staying together for appearances until a large trust fund, supposedly in Eleanor's name, matured. He'd even hinted that a divorce was on the horizon, a future where he and Sophia could be together, openly and triumphantly. "I still can't believe we're doing this," Sophia whispered as they settled into the back of the limousine he'd hired for the night. "Walking into a company gala together. Isn't it risky?" "The biggest risks have the biggest rewards," he said smoothly, quoting a line he'd used in a board meeting last week. "Tonight is about power. It's about showing them who I am. And you," he said, tilting her chin up, "are part of that. You're not some secret Sophia. You're my future." Her eyes shone with a mixture of adoration and ambition. She saw her own star, rising hitched to his wagon. She was no fool. She knew dating a senior VP was a shortcut up the corporate ladder, but she'd convinced herself it was more than that. It was love. Ethan had a way of making you believe his reality. The limousine pulled up to the curb outside the Grand Serafina Hotel. It was a landmark of old-world luxury, its stone facade illuminated by golden floodlights. Liveried doormen rushed to open their doors. The air buzzed with the energy of the city's elite. Photographers' flashes popped on the red carpet, capturing the arrival of tech moguls, city council members, and financial titans. "This is incredible." Sophia breathed, her hand tightening on his arm. "I've only ever seen this place in magazines." "Get used to it," Ethan said, his voice brimming with confidence. "This is our world now." He guided her onto the red carpet, a proprietary hand on the small of her back. He posed for a few photos, enjoying the attention. He introduced Sophia to a few junior colleagues, deliberately avoiding senior management for now. He introduced her simply as Sophia, letting the implication hang in the air. He wanted whispers. He wanted speculation. It was all part of the power play. Tonight was his coronation, and he wanted everyone to see the queen he had chosen. Inside the ballroom was a breathtaking spectacle of crystal and gold. A string quartet played softly on a dais, chandeliers the size of small cars, dripped diamonds of light, and waiters in crisp uniforms moved through the throng with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Everyone who was anyone in the city's tech and finance scene was there. Ethan grabbed 2 glasses of champagne. To us, he toasted, clinking his glass against hers. And to a future without shadows. Sophia smiled, her eyes sparkling. "I'll drink that." As they mingled, Ethan felt a supreme sense of control. He was the master puppeteer, and everyone was dancing to his tune. He saw his boss, CEO David Harrison, across the room holding court. He'd go and pay his respects later, once he'd made a sufficient splash. He saw his main rival for the upcoming COO position, Mark Croft, glaring at him from across the room. Mark's date was his wife of 20 years, a pleasant but plain-looking woman. Ethan smirked. Mark played by the old rules. Ethan Blackwood was writing new ones. He felt a tap on his shoulder and turned. It was a mid-level manager from another department. "Ethan." "Good to see you," the man said, his eyes flicking curiously to Sophia. "Big night for you. I hear the Vanguard Award is a lock." "We'll see, Mark. Just happy to be here, celebrating the company's success," Ethan replied with practiced humility. He was on top of the world. Everything was going exactly to plan. He had the perfect job, the perfect mistress, and the perfect cover story. His wife was at home sketching her boring building designs, completely oblivious. In his meticulously constructed world, there were no variables he hadn't accounted for, no risks he hadn't mitigated. He was invincible. For the next hour, Ethan was in his element. He moved through the gilded ballroom like a shark navigating familiar waters. Sophia, a beautiful crimson remora, at his side. He introduced her with a casual intimacy that was far more damning than any official title. "This is Sophia," he would say, and the knowing glances and raised eyebrows from his colleagues only fueled his arrogance. He was flouting convention, and it felt exhilarating. He made a point of speaking with the Japanese investors he'd mentioned to Eleanor. They were older, more traditional men, and he could see a flicker of surprise in their eyes as he introduced Sophia, his special project manager. But Ethan's pitch was so slick, his numbers so compelling, that their professionalism soon overrode any personal judgment. He walked away from the conversation, confident he had sealed the multi-million-dollar deal. "You were amazing," Sophia whispered, her eyes wide with admiration. "You just commanded that entire conversation." "It's what I do," Ethan said with a shrug, though his chest puffed out. He finally spotted his boss, David Harrison, standing near the grand staircase. Harrison was a stern, no-nonsense CEO who valued results above all else. This was the moment Ethan had been building towards. He took Sophia's hand and strode towards him. "David," Ethan said, his voice smooth as silk. "Good evening. Wonderful event." Harrison turned his eyes sharp as a hawk's took in the scene, Ethan's confident smirk, Sophia's dazzling dress, their joined hands. A strange, unreadable expression crossed Harrison's face. It wasn't disapproval, not exactly. It was more like pity. Blackwood Harrison said, his voice flat. He gave Sophia a brief, almost dismissive nod. "Enjoying the evening immensely," We were just celebrating the successful chat with our friends from Tokyo," Ethan said, fishing for a compliment. Good Harrison said, his gaze drifting over Ethan's shoulder towards the grand entrance of the ballroom. "There are a lot of important people here tonight. Make sure you're on your best behavior." The comment was oddly paternalistic, and it pricked Ethan's ego. "Always am, David. Always am." Harrison didn't reply. He just gave another one of those strange, searching looks and turned back to his conversation. Ethan felt a flicker of unease. Harrison's reaction wasn't what he'd expected. He'd anticipated a grudging respect, perhaps a roguish man-to-man acknowledgement of Sophia's beauty. Instead, he got a warning. He shook it off. Harrison was an old-school dinosaur. He probably couldn't comprehend a man of Ethan's caliber living life on his own terms. His rival Mark Croft wasn't so subtle. He approached them near the champagne fountain, his own wife trailing nervously behind him. "Well, well," Blackwood Mark began, a sneer playing on his lips. "You certainly have a knack for aggressive expansion in all areas of the business." He let his eyes linger pointedly on Sophia. Sophia flushed, her grip on Ethan's arm tightening. Ethan's jaw clenched. "Careful, Mark," Ethan said, his voice dangerously low. "You wouldn't want to be made redundant before the big promotion announcement. It would be a shame to lose your pension." Mark's face paled. It was a low blow, but effective. He muttered an excuse and shuffled away, his wife throwing a sympathetic glance back at Sophia. "What a jerk," Sophia seethed. "Don't worry about him. He's a fly." "I'm the windshield," Ethan said, his confidence restored by the small victory. He led her to a small, secluded balcony overlooking the city. The night air was cool, and the skyline glittered like a carpet of scattered jewels. This was the life he deserved. The power, the prestige, the beautiful woman by his side. Everything was perfect. "It's beautiful out here," Sophia said, leaning against the balustrade. "Ethan, what you said to that man about the future. Were you serious?" "Of course I was," he said, pulling her close. He looked into her hopeful eyes and sold the lie with the practiced ease of a master. "Once this promotion to COO is official, everything changes. I'll have the capital and the security to finally break free. You and me, Sophia, against the world." She melted against him, her doubts erased by the sweet poison of his promises. As he held her, looking back into the glittering ballroom, he felt a surge of triumph. He saw the world not as it was, but as a reflection of his own greatness. Every person in that room was a supporting character in his story, a stepping stone on his path. He was the king, and this was his castle. He was so caught up in the grandeur of the illusion that he failed to recognize the hollowness at its core. He didn't build this castle. He hadn't paid for a single stone. And he had no idea the real owner was about to arrive. The evening was reaching its crescendo. The dinner service had concluded, and David Harrison was now on the main stage, preparing to announce the recipient of the Vanguard Award, the highest honor for leadership and innovation at the company. A palpable buzz filled the room. Ethan stood with Sophia near the front, his posture radiating a confident expectation. He'd already prepared a mental draft of his acceptance speech. And now David Harrison's voice boomed through the speakers. "Before we present our main award, we have a very special acknowledgement to make. This magnificent hotel, the Grand Serafina, has been a partner of our gala for over a decade. Tonight we are incredibly honored to have the owner with us in person. He is a titan of industry, a philanthropist, and a man whose vision has shaped much of this city's skyline, though he often prefers to remain behind the scenes. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in offering a warm welcome to Mr. Alistair Vance. Ethan's ears perked up. Vance. The name was the same as Eleanor's maiden name, but he dismissed it as a coincidence. Vance was a common enough name. Still, he was intrigued. He had always wondered who owned the notoriously private Grand Serafina portfolio. This was a networking opportunity of a lifetime. He subtly adjusted his tie, preparing to make an impression. A hush fell over the crowd as all heads turned towards the grand entrance. The ornate double doors, which had been closed, were slowly pulled open by two uniformed attendants. For a moment, the doorway was empty, building suspense. Then a man stepped through. He was in his late 60s with a mane of silver hair and a presence that commanded attention without a single word. He wore a simple, exquisitely tailored charcoal suit that made every other tuxedo in the room look like a cheap rental. His face was etched with the lines of quiet authority and sharp intelligence. This was Alistair Vance. Ethan felt a jolt of pure, unadulterated ambition. He had to meet this man. But then Mr. Vance paused in the doorway and extended his hand back into the shadowed foyer. A moment later, a woman stepped into the light, taking his arm. Time seemed to slow down. The murmur of the crowd, the distant clink of glasses, the soft music from the quartet, it all faded into a dull, roaring sound in Ethan's ears. The woman was Eleanor. It was his wife, but it was a version of her he had never seen before. She was not the quiet, mousy woman in sensible cardigans he had left at home. She was wearing a breathtaking gown of midnight blue silk that shimmered under the chandeliers, cut in a classic, elegant style that screamed bespoke couture. Her hair, usually tied in a simple bun, was styled in a sophisticated chignon, with a few loose tendrils framing her face. Diamonds glittered at her ears and throat, not ostentatious, but with the deep, fiery brilliance of real quality. But it wasn't the dress or the diamonds that struck Ethan like a physical blow. It was her expression. The hesitant, apologetic smile was gone. In its place was a look of serene, unshakable confidence. She held her head high, her posture perfect. She wasn't in anyone's shadow. She was the source of the light, and she was on the arm of Alistair Vance, her father. The pieces of the puzzle pieces Ethan had been too arrogant to even notice slammed into place with brutal, sickening force. Eleanor's moderately successful architect father, her quiet trips to visit her dad, the way she never, ever worried about money, even when he'd been a junior analyst, her maiden name. Vance. A wave of nausea washed over him. He felt the blood drain from his face. Beside him, Sophia stiffened. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice laced with confusion. "Who is that? She looks like—" Ethan couldn't speak. His throat was a desert. The crowd, which had been silent in awe, began to whisper. The whispers grew into a wave of murmurs, spreading through the ballroom like fire through dry grass. People who knew Ethan, who knew his wife, were turning to stare, their faces a mixture of shock, confusion, and dawning, delicious scandal. Alistair Vance, with Eleanor on his arm, began to walk slowly into the room. They didn't look at the crowd. They didn't look at the stage. Their eyes were fixed on one person. They were looking directly at Ethan Blackwood. Ethan felt 1,000 pairs of eyes on him. He felt Mark Croft's stare, now filled not with envy but with pure, unadulterated schadenfreude. He felt David Harrison's gaze from the stage, that look of pity, finally making a horrifying kind of sense. He looked from the radiant, powerful woman who was his wife to the terrified, confused girl in the red dress beside him. And in that moment, the floor of his borrowed castle didn't just crack. It disintegrated into dust, plunging him into a free fall with no end in sight. The king was naked, and everyone could see. The walk from the entrance to where Ethan stood felt like an eternity. For Ethan, each step Alistair and Eleanor took was a hammer blow against the fragile structure of his life. The whispers in the ballroom were now a low, predatory hum. Sophia had taken a half step away from him, her hand no longer on his arm, a dawning horror in her eyes as she began to connect the dots. Alistair Vance stopped a few feet in front of them. His calm, assessing gaze swept over Ethan, then lingered for a cold, dismissive moment on Sophia and her bright red dress. There was no anger in his eyes, just a profound, chilling disappointment. It was the look of a man observing an insect. Eleanor, however, looked directly at her husband. Her expression was not one of rage or hysteria. It was one of crystalline clarity, as if she were seeing him for the first time, stripped of all the illusions he had so carefully constructed. "Eleanor." Ethan stammered, his voice a hoarse croak. What is this? What are you doing here?" A small, humorless smile touched Eleanor's lips. "I should ask you the same thing, Ethan, though I suppose the answer is rather obvious." Her eyes flicked to Sophia, a glance so sharp and quick it was like a paper cut. Sophia visibly flinched and looked at Ethan, her face pale with confusion and betrayal. "Ethan, who is this?" Before Ethan could formulate a lie, Alistair Vance spoke. His voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of absolute authority, cutting through the surrounding whispers and silencing the room. "This," he said, his gaze locking onto Ethan's, "is my daughter, Eleanor Vance Blackwood." A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. The scandal was no longer a matter of speculation. It was a confirmed 5-act drama, playing out in the center of the ballroom. Your daughter," Sophia whispered, turning to Ethan, her world tilting on its axis. "You told me her father was an architect. You said she had no money." Ethan's mind was a maelstrom of panic. It's complicated." He managed the words, sounding pathetic even to his own ears. "No, it's not complicated at all," Alistair said, his voice dropping to a steely quiet. "It's actually very simple. Let me clarify a few things for you, Mr. Blackwood, because you seem to operate under a series of rather profound misconceptions." He took a step closer. "Misconception number 1. That you are a self-made man." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "I founded a venture capital firm 30 years ago. One of my first and most successful seed investments was in a promising little tech startup. You might have heard of it. It's called Innovate Dynamics." The blood in Ethan's veins turned to ice. He looked past Alistair to the stage where David Harrison stood with a grim, funereal expression. Harrison knew. Of course he knew. He knew who signed his checks. "Through my holding company, the Vance Group, I retain a 68% majority stake in this company." Alistair continued, his voice relentless. "David Harrison is an excellent CEO, but he works for me, which means, Ethan, that for the past 12 years, you have also worked for me." A sick, wrenching feeling churned in Ethan's stomach. His promotions, his bonuses, his meteoric rise. Had it all been orchestrated? A gilded cage he had mistaken for a throne. Misconception. Number 2. Alistair went on, his tone becoming even colder. That you are a wealthy man. The house in Chestnut Hill. My wedding gift to my daughter. The Jaguar you drive, a birthday present for my daughter. The stock portfolio that gives you your swagger at the country club. It was transferred from a trust I set up. For my daughter. You are not a wealthy man, Ethan. You are a man who has been living on my daughter's allowance. Each word was a precise, devastating blow. The life he had built, the success he had claimed as his own, was a sham. A carefully curated experience provided by the very family he had scorned. Eleanor finally spoke, her voice clear and strong, devoid of the hesitation he was so used to. I asked my father to help you, Ethan. In the beginning. I believed in you. I believed in your ambition. I thought if I gave you a foundation, you would build something wonderful for us. She looked at him, and for the first time he saw not a quiet wife, but a formidable woman. I was content to be in the background. I was happy to let you have the spotlight. I thought your happiness would be our happiness. But I was wrong. You didn't want a partner. You wanted an audience. And when my quiet support wasn't enough, you found a new one. Her gaze fell on Sophia again, but this time it held a sliver of pity. He told you I was passionless, didn't he? That our marriage was a prison of obligation, that I was holding him back from his brilliant destiny. Sophia, looking utterly lost, could only nod mutely, tears welling in her eyes. That's his story, Eleanor said. The truth is, my greatest passion was my misplaced faith in him. The only prison was the one he built for himself with his own lies. And the only thing I was holding back, she finished, her voice ringing with newfound power, was the consequences. Alistair Vance delivered the final fatal blow. Your employment at Innovate Dynamics is terminated effective immediately. Your company credit cards have been cancelled. The keys to the house and the car, which are in my daughter's name, will be collected by my security team tomorrow morning. You will be escorted from this building now. He gestured subtly, and 2 large men in dark suits, who had been standing discreetly by the doors, began to move towards them. Ethan stood there, stripped bare, in front of the entire world he had tried so desperately to impress. He was not a king. He was not a shark. He was a fraud. A court jester who had been allowed to wear a paper crown for a little too long, and the true monarch had finally arrived to end the charade. The fallout was instantaneous and brutal. As the 2 security men approached, a path cleared around Ethan as if he were carrying a contagious disease. Former colleagues averted their gazes, their expressions ranging from pity to contempt. Mark Croft, his rival, wore a look of undisguised, triumphant glee. Sophia was the first to desert the sinking ship. The reality of the situation crashed down on her. She wasn't the chosen partner of a powerful executive, but the disposable mistress of a kept man. The future he had promised her was a fantasy built on someone else's money. Humiliation and anger warred on her face. You lied to me, she hissed at Ethan, her voice trembling with rage. You lied about everything. Without another word, she turned and fled, pushing her way through the gawking crowd, her red dress a beacon of her own public shaming. She disappeared out the doors, leaving Ethan completely and utterly alone. One of the security guards, a large man with an impassive face, reached Ethan. "Sir, you need to come with us." His voice was polite but unyielding. Ethan's mind was still reeling, unable to process the speed and totality of his own destruction. He looked desperately at Eleanor, a primal instinct to plead for taking over. "Ellie, please," he begged, using the pet name from their early happier days. "We can talk about this. This is a mistake." Eleanor looked at him, and her face was a mask of calm. The woman he thought he knew, the woman who would have cried and forgiven him in the past, was gone forever. "No, Ethan," she said, her voice steady. "The mistake was my 16-year investment in you. The return has been disappointing. There is nothing left to talk about." Her finality was more devastating than any shouted insult. It was the sound of a door being closed, locked and barricaded. As the guards gently but firmly took his arms, he saw his boss, David Harrison, approaching Alistair and Eleanor. Harrison bowed his head slightly to Alistair. "Mr. Vance, I'm so sorry you had to witness this." "It's not your fault," David Alistair replied calmly. "The trash has simply taken itself out." The insult delivered so casually was the final twist of the knife. Ethan was no longer a person to them. He was a piece of refuse to be disposed of. The walk out of the ballroom was the longest and most shameful journey of his life. Every eye was on him. He could hear the frantic whispering, the stifled laughter. He was the evening's entertainment, a cautionary tale that would be told for years to come. The man who flew too close to the sun, only to find out the sun was owned by his wife's father. They didn't take him out the grand entrance. They led him through a side door down a service corridor that smelled of disinfectant and boiled vegetables, and out into a cold, dark alley. The contrast with the opulence of the ballroom was dizzying. One moment he was sipping vintage champagne, the next he was standing next to a dumpster. "A taxi has been called for you, sir." One of the guards said, his duty done. Then they turned and went back inside the service door, clicking shut behind them, leaving him alone in the alley. He stood there in his $1,000 tuxedo, his whole body trembling with a mixture of shock, rage, and a profound, terrifying emptiness. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, expecting a message from Sophia, either angry or desperate. But it was a series of automated emails. "Innovate Dynamics corporate account access revoked. American Express Platinum business card deactivated. Building security key, fob access to Chestnut Hill residence rescinded." The efficiency of his erasure was breathtaking. Alistair Vance hadn't just fired him. He had unplugged him from the life he had known. A yellow cab pulled up to the end of the alley. Ethan got in the worn fabric of the seat, a stark contrast to the plush leather of the limo he'd arrived in. "Where to?" Buddy the driver asked, not even glancing back. And for the first time, Ethan Blackwood had no answer. He had no home to go to. He had no job to wake up for. The woman he claimed to love had abandoned him, and the woman he had abandoned had just demolished him. He stared out the window at the glittering city lights, the same lights that had looked like his kingdom just an hour ago. Now they just seemed to mock him, cold and distant stars, in a universe that no longer cared that he existed. The unraveling was complete. He was nothing. 6 months later, the spring sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of a corner office on the 54th floor of the Vance Group headquarters. The view was panoramic, a god's-eye perspective of the city skyline that Alistair Vance had helped to shape. But Alistair wasn't in the main chair today. He was sitting in one of the visitors' chairs, watching his daughter. Eleanor Vance stood before a large drafting table. Her brow furrowed in concentration as she made a minute adjustment to a complex architectural blueprint with a stylus. Gone were the quiet cardigans and the air of hesitant apology. She wore a sharply tailored navy blue pantsuit, her hair cut in a chic professional bob, She radiated an energy that was both calm and commanding. The blueprints on the table were for the Vance Center for the Arts, a new philanthropic project that was her brainchild. She was not just the benefactor. She was the lead architect, a role she had earned with a portfolio of brilliant anonymous design competition entries she'd worked on during the lonely nights of her marriage. "The load-bearing calculations for the central atrium are still not quite right," she murmured, more to herself than to her father. "I want the glass ceiling to feel like it's floating, but the engineering has to be flawless." Alistair smiled a genuine, proud smile. "If anyone can make it float, Eleanor, it's you." She looked up and returned his smile. The sadness that had lingered in her eyes for years was gone, replaced by the clear light of purpose. The scandal of the Vanguard Awards gala had been the talk of the town for weeks, but Eleanor had weathered it with a grace that silenced all gossip. She hadn't reveled in Ethan's downfall. She had simply moved forward, stepping into the power that had always been hers, but which she had been afraid to claim. Her divorce from Ethan had been swift and brutally simple. With a prenuptial agreement as ironclad as one of Alistair's contracts and the blatant public infidelity, Ethan had no leverage. He walked away with nothing but the clothes on his back and a mountain of debt from the lavish lifestyle he could no longer afford. The doorbell to the office chimed, and Alistair's assistant, a kind woman named Maria, poked her head in. "Miss Vance, your 11 o'clock is here." "Thank you, Maria. Send him in." A young, nervous-looking man in a slightly too large suit walked in, clutching a portfolio. He was one of the finalists for the junior architect position on her team. Eleanor greeted him warmly, her confidence putting him immediately at ease. She was no longer just a Vance by name. She was a leader, a mentor. As she began the interview, Alistair quietly slipped out of the office, leaving her to her new life, the one she was building on her own foundation. Meanwhile, across town in a cramped cubicle at a third-rate insurance firm, a man named Ethan was on the phone trying to sell a life insurance policy to an uninterested retiree. His voice had lost its charismatic boom. It was now tinged with the weary desperation of a man who had seen the top and was now living at the bottom. He had tried to find another high-powered job, but the story of his spectacular humiliation had followed him. No one in the city's elite circles would touch him. He was a pariah, a living punchline. He now lived in a small, dingy apartment, his fine suits replaced by off-the-rack polyester. Sometimes, late at night, he would scroll through financial news websites, a masochistic ritual of seeing the world he had lost. Today, an article caught his eye. It was from the city's architectural journal. The headline read, "Eleanor Vance unveils visionary design for new arts center." There was a picture of her standing in front of a stunning model of her building, looking powerful, happy, and radiant. She was everything he had once falsely claimed to be. He stared at the photo for a long time, a hollow ache in his chest. He finally understood. He had thought her silence was weakness, her support a given. He had seen her as a part of his story's background. He realized now that he had never even been the main character in his own life. He was just a temporary resident in hers, a flawed early draft in a story that was always truly about Eleanor Vance. He closed the browser, the bright image of her success burning behind his eyes, and picked up the phone to make another cold call. The line at the other end just rang and rang. The life of Ethan Blackwood had shrunk to the size of a single, sparsely furnished room in a run-down apartment complex in a forgotten part of the city. The panoramic views of Chestnut Hill were replaced by a grimy window that overlooked a brick wall, The scent of Eleanor's fresh orchids was a ghost chased away by the lingering smell of stale coffee and desperation. His world was no longer measured in stock market gains and successful acquisitions, but in the number of rejections he faced per day. He had lost the tailored suits, the Jaguar, the respect. But the hardest thing he lost was the reflection of the man he thought he was. Without the external validation, the praise, the envy of others, he was forced to look at himself, and he did not like what he saw. He saw a hollow man, a parasite, who had mistaken the host's lifeblood for his own. His days at the insurance firm were a monotonous purgatory. He read from a script, his once commanding voice, now a dull drone trying to convince strangers to prepare for a future he himself had utterly failed to secure. He was surrounded by people he once would have considered beneath his notice, people who were now his peers. They were not unkind, but they kept their distance. The story of his downfall was an urban legend in the city's business circles, and even at this low rung of the corporate ladder, the whispers had followed him. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, during his lunch break, he was huddled under the awning of a coffee shop, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee. He was watching the rain sluice down the dirty pavement when he saw her. It was Sophia Jensen. She was walking briskly, sharing an umbrella with another woman, both of them laughing at something on a phone. The vibrant red dress was gone, replaced by a sensible, stylish trench coat and practical boots. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore minimal makeup. She looked different. She looked real. The ambition and adoration that had once been plastered on her face were gone, replaced by a calm, self-possessed confidence. For a moment, Ethan's heart hammered in his chest. A wild, foolish hope flared within him. She was the only other person who had been in the center of the storm with him. Maybe she would understand. Maybe they could. He took a step forward out from under the awning and called her name. Sophia. She stopped and turned. Her laughter died as she saw him. Her friend looked from Ethan's haggard face and ill-fitting coat to Sophia, her expression questioning. For a few seconds, Sophia's face was a blank canvas. Then recognition dawned, followed by something he hadn't expected. It wasn't anger or hatred. It was a cool, dispassionate pity, the kind one might feel for a stray dog. "Ethan," she said, her voice even. There was no trace of the breathless admiration he was used to. I just wanted to see how you were," he stammered, feeling foolish under her steady gaze. "I'm fine," she said. It wasn't a platitude, it was a simple statement of fact. I transferred out of the main branch. "I'm in the San Francisco office now. It's a better fit." "Oh," he said, the single word sounding inadequate. "Good. That's good for you." She gave a small, tight smile. "It is. I learned a valuable lesson that night. Never hitch your wagon to a shooting star, especially when you don't know who owns the sky." The metaphor was sharp, and it hit its mark. I'm building my own career now, on my own merits. It's slower, but it's real. Her friend tugged gently on her arm. "Sophia, we're going to be late." "Right." She looked at Ethan one last time. "Goodbye, Ethan. I hope you figure things out." And with that, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. She didn't look back. Ethan stood in the rain, the coffee in his hand, now cold, watching her go. He had expected a scene, a confrontation, perhaps even a sliver of shared victimhood. Instead, He got closure, her closure, not his. She had processed the humiliation, learned from it, and moved on. Her life was continuing its upward trajectory, albeit on a different path. He had simply stopped frozen on the night of the gala. He had told her she was his future, but he had only ever been a detour for her, a costly mistake she had already corrected. He was a chapter in her book, a chapter she had already finished reading. He, on the other hand, was stuck on the same page, reading the story of his own failure over and over again, an echo in an empty room. That evening he went back to his apartment, ignored the stack of final notice bills on his counter, and for the first time since that night, he wept. They were not tears of self-pity, but tears of a terrifying, profound loneliness. He had finally been seen for what he was, and the world had collectively decided to look away. Eleanor Vance stood on the wind-swept raw earth of the construction site, a hard hat perched on her head. Around her, the skeleton of the Vance Center for the Arts was beginning to rise, a testament of steel and concrete to a future she was actively creating. The chaos of construction, the roar of machinery, the shouts of workers, the clang of metal on metal, was music to her. It was the sound of progress, the sound of something new being born from nothing. Her life was now a carefully balanced structure of her own design. Her days were filled with meetings, site visits, and long productive hours at the drafting table. She had found her voice not just in boardrooms, but in the elegant, functional lines of her designs. She was no longer Eleanor Vance Blackwood, the quiet wife. She was Eleanor Vance, the architect. Her work had attracted attention. Samuel Reed, a notoriously sharp architectural critic for the New York Standard, had initially written a skeptical piece about the project, dismissing it as a potential vanity project for a billionaire's daughter. Instead of issuing a press release, Eleanor had invited him to her office. For 2 hours, she walked him through every blueprint, every 3D model, explaining her philosophy. The interplay of light and space, the commitment to sustainable materials. Samuel, a man known for his acerbic wit, had been silenced by her passion and undeniable talent. He left her office looking thoughtful, and his follow-up article was a glowing retraction. It praised her visionary synthesis of classical form and modern functionality. He became an unlikely ally, and over time, a friend. They would have lunch once a month, their conversations filled with spirited debates about architecture, art, and the city they both loved. He saw her not for her name or her past, but for the brilliance of her mind. It was a partnership of equals, something she had never truly experienced before. One evening, as she was packing her briefcase to go home, her assistant handed her a small stack of mail. Tucked between industry magazines and invitations to charity events was a plain white envelope. There was no return address, but she recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Ethan's. Her first instinct was to throw it away unopened. What could he possibly have to say that would matter now? But a different, calmer part of her, the part that had designed atriums and calculated load-bearing weights, was curious. Not with emotion, but with an engineer's desire to understand a completed failed structure. She sat down at her desk, the city lights beginning to twinkle outside her window, and opened it. The letter was 2 pages long, written on cheap-lined paper. It was not the confident, arrogant scrawl of the man she had married, but the shaky, desperate script of a broken man. He wrote of his loneliness, of the crushing weight of his new reality. He apologized not with the smooth, manipulative charm of his past, but with a raw, ugly honesty. He admitted he had never truly seen her. that he had been blinded by his own reflection in the mirror of success she and her father had provided. He didn't ask for forgiveness, nor did he ask for a second chance. He asked for one thing. "I just need to know the last line," read, "Was any of it real to you? Did you ever love the man you thought I was?" Eleanor read the letter twice. A year ago, these words would have torn her apart, validating her pain, but also reopening old wounds. Now she felt a profound sense of distance. She was reading about two people she no longer knew, the arrogant man he had been, and the quiet, hopeful woman who had loved him. Both were ghosts. She thought about his question. Did she love him? Yes, she had. Desperately. But she had been in love with a blueprint, a design for a man she thought she could help build. The final structure had been a catastrophic failure, unable to bear the weight of its own ego. She folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. She felt no anger, no sadness. She felt only a quiet finality. He was a part of her history, a lesson in foundations, but he was not a part of her future. Eleanor stood up and walked to the large window overlooking the construction site. The steel beams, illuminated by powerful floodlights, reached for the night sky like a promise. That was her reality now. Solid, tangible, and rising. She did not need to answer Ethan's letter. Her answer was not in words, but in the steel and glass taking shape below. It was in her signature on the blueprints, the only signature that mattered anymore. Her own. And so Ethan Blackwood's world, built on a foundation of lies, and someone else's fortune, came crashing down in the most public way imaginable. It's a stark reminder that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds its way to the surface. Eleanor Vance's story isn't one of revenge, but of rediscovery. She reclaimed the power she had willingly given away, not to destroy her husband, but to finally build her own life. She proves that true strength isn't about the noise you make, but the solid foundation you build for yourself. What did you think of Ethan's karmic downfall? Was Eleanor's unveiling perfectly played? We all know someone who has underestimated a quiet, powerful person, and we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of karmic justice and female empowerment resonated with you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded of their own inner strength, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that uncover the truth and celebrate the triumph of the human spirit. Thank you for listening. On a rain-slicked New York City street, a 7-month pregnant woman stood shivering in a $1,000 gown, her world shattered by the man she loved. Isabella Davenport had just been thrown out of a Rolls-Royce by her millionaire husband, Julian, his parting words echoing the screech of the tires. "You're an embarrassment. Find your own way home." As the taillights vanished into the stormy night, Isabella was left alone, vulnerable and terrified. But Julian made a fatal miscalculation. He saw a discarded wife, a problem he could leave on the curb. What he didn't see, what he couldn't possibly know, was that the silent man in the driver's cap, the man who had just witnessed his monstrous act, held an unimaginable secret. He wasn't just a driver. He was her billionaire godfather, and he was about to unleash a storm of his own. The air in the back of the 2025 Rolls-Royce Phantom was as cold as Julian Davenport's heart. It was supposed to be a sanctuary of bespoke leather and polished burr walnut, a silent cocoon whisking them through the glittering canyons of Manhattan. But for Isabella, 7 months into a difficult pregnancy, it felt like a prison cell on wheels. Outside, the lights of the city blurred into streaks of gold and neon through the rain-spattered windows. Inside, the silence was a heavy, suffocating blanket. Julian hadn't spoken a word to her since they'd left the Metropolitan Arts Patrons Gala, one of the premier events on the city's social calendar. He just stared straight ahead, his jaw a tight knot of muscle under his perfectly sculpted stubble. His anger was a palpable force radiating from his custom-tailored Tom Ford tuxedo. Isabella rested a protective hand on the swell of her belly, where their son was kicking restlessly, as if sensing his mother's distress. "Julian, please," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the soft hum of the engine. He was being inappropriate. Mr. Sterling just stepped in to help. Julian finally turned his head, his blue eyes as sharp and cold as ice chips. "Mr. Sterling? You mean Arthur Sterling? The fossil who controls half the shipping in the Western Hemisphere. That Mr. Sterling?" His voice was a low, venomous hiss. "And what did you do?" "Isabella, you, my pregnant wife, caused a scene. You allowed that lecherous old real estate developer, Marcus Thorne, to corner you, and then you let Sterling, a man I've been trying to get a meeting with for 6 months, treat me like a schoolboy who can't control his wife." Tears pricked at Isabella's eyes. "He put his hand on my stomach, Julian. He was drunk and said something vile about the baby. Arthur Mr. Sterling was a gentleman. He simply asked him to step away." "A gentleman?" Julian scoffed, a cruel smirk twisting his lips. "He made me look weak, in front of everyone. The press, my competitors, my investors. They don't see a gentleman defending a pregnant woman. They see Julian Davenport's wife being accosted, and another more powerful man stepping in. It's about optics, Isabella. Something you've never understood." Isabella shrank back against the plush leather. This was the Julian she had come to know and fear over the past 2 years. The public Julian was charming, philanthropic, a self-made real estate mogul featured in Forbes, 30 under 30 just a few years back. He had swept her off her feet with grand gestures and promises of a fairy tale life. She was an art history graduate working as a junior curator, and he was the prince who saw her potential. But the private Julian was a different man entirely. He was a creature of intense insecurity, obsessed with status and public perception. Her family, with their modest academic backgrounds, was a source of quiet shame for him. Her simple tastes were an irritation. Her pregnancy, which should have been a joy, had become another variable for him to manage. He dictated her diet, her social appearances, even the designer of her maternity gowns, all to project the perfect image of a powerful, thriving couple. "I didn't mean to cause a scene," she pleaded softly. "I was just scared." "Scared?" He laughed, a short, ugly sound. "You're married to me. You have nothing to be scared of except for embarrassing me. That's your only job right now, Bella. Look beautiful, be quiet, and don't embarrass me." "And you failed. Spectacularly." She flinched at the nickname Bella, which once sounded like an endearment and now felt like a leash. Through the partition, she could just see the back of the driver's head. Mr. Peterson. He was a new driver hired a few months ago through a high-end private security firm. An older man, always impeccably dressed with a quiet dignity and kind eyes that she'd noticed in the rearview mirror. He was so unobtrusive he was practically invisible. But tonight, Isabella felt a hot flush of shame, knowing he could hear every venomous word Julian spat at her. "I'm sorry," she whispered the words, tasting like ash in her mouth. "Sorry doesn't fix the fact that I'll be fielding calls for a week about this," Julian snapped, pulling out his phone. He began scrolling his thumb, moving with angry precision. "I spend millions crafting an image of power and control, and you undo it in 5 minutes because you can't handle a drunk old man." Isabella turned to look out the window, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. The rain was coming down harder now, lashing against the glass. They were crossing the Queensborough Bridge, the city lights a distant, indifferent galaxy. She felt as isolated as if she were floating in space. The man beside her was a stranger, the gilded cage he had built for her, now revealing its sharp, cruel bars. And in her womb, her son kicked again, a tiny, insistent reminder of who she needed to be strong for. She didn't know how much more she could take. The drive back to their sterile, multi-million-dollar penthouse on the Upper East Side was excruciating. Julian continued to mutter under his breath, scrolling through social media, reading out tweets and mentions of the incident with a kind of masochistic fury. Julian Davenport's pregnant wife in altercation at Met Gala. Altercation. It sounds like a bar fight, he seethed, throwing his $20,000 Richard Mille watch-adorned wrist down in frustration. "This is a disaster." "It will blow over, Julian," Isabella said, trying to soothe him, though she felt anything but calm. A deep, cold dread was beginning to pool in her stomach. "Blow over." He finally pocketed his phone and turned his full, wrathful attention on her. "You don't get it. Perception is reality. Today's forgotten tweet is tomorrow's failed business deal. My entire empire is built on the perception of unflappable success, of having the best of everything. The perfect business, the perfect home, the perfect wife." He gestured at her, his hand dismissing her entire being. "And you are proving to be imperfect." The word hung in the air, sharp and painful. Imperfect. Her, the woman carrying his child, the woman who had given up her career, her friends, her entire life, to fit into his. "I'm a person, Julian, not an accessory for your portfolio," she said, a spark of defiance flaring through her fear. His eyes narrowed dangerously. "You're what I made you. When I met you, you were cataloguing dusty paintings in a museum basement. I put you in Chanel. I put you in this car. I put this baby in you. Don't you ever forget that you exist in this world, because I allow it." The cruelty of the statement stole her breath. It was the most honest thing he had ever said to her. In that moment, the facade of their marriage didn't just crack. It disintegrated into dust. She saw him for what he was, a petty tyrant, a terrified boy playing king in a castle of glass. The car slowed, turning onto a dark residential street a few blocks from their apartment building. The rain was relentless now, a torrential downpour that made the world outside a liquid nightmare. "I want to go home," Isabella said, her voice trembling. "No," Julian said, his voice flat and devoid of any emotion. "You've been a liability tonight. I can't have you in my home, tainting it with your failure." Isabella stared at him, uncomprehending. "What are you talking about?" He leaned forward and tapped on the glass partition. "Peterson, pull over." The driver, Mr. Peterson, smoothly guided the Rolls-Royce to the curb, the engine purring almost silently. "Julian, what are you doing?" Isabella asked, panic finally seizing her. "This isn't our building." He turned to her, his face a mask of utter contempt. I said you failed. And in my world, failure has consequences. You wanted to be independent. You wanted to stand up to Marcus Thorne on your own. Fine. Be independent. He reached across her and pushed the button unlocking the doors. A cold, wet gust of wind swirled into the car. Get out. For a moment, Isabella couldn't process the words. It had to be a joke. A cruel, twisted test. Julian, stop it. I'm 7 months pregnant. It's pouring. Get out of my car. He enunciated each word with chilling precision. You're an embarrassment. Find your own way home. Maybe you can call your new friend Arthur Sterling for a ride. He unbuckled his seatbelt, leaned over, and physically pushed open her door. The rain immediately began soaking the hem of her silk gown. The sounds of the city, a distant siren. The hiss of tires on wet asphalt rushed in. Julian, no, please, she cried, grabbing his arm. He ripped his arm away, as if her touch had burned him. Don't touch me. His face was contorted with a rage that terrified her. He shoved her not hard, but with enough force to make her lose her balance in the small space. Out! Sobbing. Isabella scrambled out of the car, her delicate heels sinking slightly into the soft asphalt of the street. The cold rain was an immediate shock, plastering her hair to her face and soaking through the thin fabric of her gown in seconds. She stood there trembling, one hand on her belly, as Julian leaned across the seat and pulled the door shut with a solid final thud. She watched in disbelief as the car didn't move. She could see Julian's silhouette through the tinted window, gesturing angrily. Then the driver's side door opened. Mr. Peterson, the quiet, dignified driver, stepped out into the deluge. He didn't even grab an umbrella. He walked around the front of the massive car, his face grim, and opened the rear door on Julian's side. Isabella could hear Julian's muffled shouting. What the hell are you doing? I give the orders. Get back in the car and drive. Mr. Peterson said something. Isabella couldn't hear his voice, low but firm. Then, to her utter astonishment, Julian, the powerful, untouchable Julian Davenport, got out of the car. He sputtered, pointing a finger at the driver, but Mr. Peterson simply stood there, an immovable object in the storm. After another brief heated exchange, Julian threw his hands up in disgust, turned his back on his own car, and stalked off down the street, disappearing into the rainy darkness like a phantom. Isabella was left standing, shivering and confused, as the driver, Mr. Peterson, walked calmly over to her. He took off his own suit jacket, and without a word draped it over her trembling shoulders. The warmth of the wool was a small comfort in the biting cold. "Come on, my dear," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle, yet filled with an authority that dwarfed Julian's blustering rage. "Let's get you out of the rain." He gently guided her not to the back seat, but to the front passenger door, opening it for her. As she slid onto the warm leather, her mind reeled. Why had the driver kicked her husband out of his own car? Who was this man? He got back into the driver's seat, the engine still purring. He turned up the heat, and warm air began to flow through the vents, chasing away some of the chill. He looked at her, his kind eyes filled with a deep, sorrowful anger that seemed to be directed not at her, but at the world for what had just happened. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice a broken whisper. He placed a comforting hand on the dashboard. "We're going somewhere safe. Somewhere he can never touch you again." He paused, his gaze meeting hers, and in that look, years of unspoken history seemed to pass between them. "It's all right, Isabella. You're with me now. You're with Arthur." The name hung in the air, suspended between the soft tick of the dashboard clock and the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers. Arthur, the name of the powerful billionaire at the gala. The name Julian had spat out like a curse. It couldn't be. Isabella stared at the man beside her. Mr. Peterson. No, Arthur was older, perhaps in his late 60s. He had a full head of silver hair, neatly combed, and a face that seemed etched with quiet wisdom and formidable resolve. His driver's uniform, now damp from the rain, looked strangely out of place on him. She had seen him dozens of times, exchanged pleasantries, offered him coffee. He had been a silent fixture in her life, as unassuming as the polished chrome on the door handles. Arthur. Sterling. She breathed the question laced with disbelief. He gave a sad, gentle smile. I'm afraid so. I apologize for the deception, Isabella. I never intended for you to find out this way. The Rolls-Royce moved silently through the deserted streets, not towards her penthouse, but downtown, towards the old, established neighborhoods of Gramercy Park. The confusion in Isabella's mind was a swirling vortex of fear, relief, and 1,000 unanswered questions. But you're a driver, she stammered, clutching his jacket tighter around her. You work for a security firm. I own the security firm, he corrected her gently. Among other things, when you married Davenport, I had my concerns. He has a certain reputation in the financial world. Not a good one. I wanted to keep an eye on you to make sure you were safe without interfering. I wanted to give your marriage a chance to be real. He sighed, a sound heavy with regret. I arranged to be placed as your personal driver. It was the easiest way to be close by if you ever needed me. Isabella's mind flashed back. The moments of small kindness. The bottle of water appearing in the seat-back pocket on a hot day. The way he always seemed to be there, waiting a few moments before she even called for the car. The time she'd felt faint while shopping, and he had calmly escorted her to a chair and returned with orange juice, speaking soothingly to her until she felt better. She had thought he was just an exceptionally good employee. But why? She asked, tears welling in her eyes again. But this time they were tears of confusion, not despair. Why would you do all that? For me? Arthur pulled the car to a stop in front of a stately ivy-covered brownstone on a quiet, tree-lined square. He turned off the engine, and the ensuing silence was profound. He turned to face her, his expression one of infinite tenderness. Your father, Marco Rossi. He began, his voice thick with emotion. He wasn't just my first business partner, Isabella. He was my best friend. More than a friend. He was the brother I never had. Isabella's heart stopped. Her father. He had died in a tragic car accident when she was 12. He was a brilliant, passionate art historian and appraiser who had, according to her mother, made one very smart investment early in his life that had kept their family comfortable but not wealthy. My father. He knew you. Knew me. Arthur let out a soft chuckle. We started our first company together in a garage in Queens. It was a logistics company moving fine art for museums and private collectors. Marco had the expertise, the contacts in the art world. I had a head for business and a bit of family money to get us started. That little company became Sterling Rossi Global Logistics. Today it's just called Sterling Global. The pieces began to click into place, forming a picture so vast and unbelievable it made Isabella dizzy. Sterling Global was a behemoth, a multi-billion-dollar corporation with interests in shipping, aviation, security, and technology. And her father, her quiet academic father, had been a co-founder. When your father passed away, Arthur continued, his eyes glistening. It was the worst day of my life. I was at his side at the hospital. His last words to me. He made me promise. He made me promise I would always look out for you and your mother. That I would be your godfather, your guardian angel, and make sure you never wanted for anything and were always protected. He looked away towards the rain-streaked windshield. Your mother, God rest her soul, was a proud woman. After Marco's death, she didn't want charity. She accepted the trust fund I set up from your father's share of the company. But she wanted you to have a normal life away from the world of extreme wealth. I honored that. I watched you from a distance through reports from my staff, through contributions to your schools. I made sure the path was always clear for you, but I never interfered. I wanted you to be your own person, Marco's daughter, brilliant and kind. Until I married Julian. Isabella finished for him, the realization dawning on her. Until you married Julian, he confirmed, his voice hardening. A man who preys on people's good nature, who builds his fortune on leveraged debt and empty promises. I ran a full background check. I knew he was dangerous, but I had hoped your love would change him. I hoped I was wrong. Tonight, he set his hand clenching into a fist on the steering wheel. Tonight he proved I wasn't, throwing you, his pregnant wife, the mother of his child, out into the street. That is an unforgivable sin. He took a deep breath, composing himself. This is one of my properties. It's completely secure. My personal staff is inside waiting. There's a doctor on call. You are safe here, Isabella. He got out of the car and came around to open her door, this time holding a large black umbrella to shield her. As she stepped onto the sidewalk, she looked up at the magnificent old house, its windows glowing with a warm, welcoming light. It looked like a sanctuary. For the first time in 2 years, she didn't feel like an accessory or an asset. She didn't feel like a possession. As Arthur Sterling, her silent guardian, her father's best friend, her billionaire godfather, gently led her up the steps out of the storm and into the warmth. Isabella Rossi felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. She felt safe. The inside of the brownstone was the antithesis of the cold, modern penthouse she shared with Julian. It was filled with rich mahogany, worn leather armchairs, shelves overflowing with books and walls adorned with breathtaking art. Not the trendy investment-grade contemporary art Julian favored, but masterpieces, a small, intimate Degas sculpture of a dancer, a vibrant Monet landscape, a charcoal sketch by Sargent that was so alive it seemed to breathe. It was a home, not a showroom. It felt like her father, a kind, matronly woman in a simple black dress, whom Arthur introduced as Mrs. Gable. The housekeeper immediately met them at the door. She took Isabella's wet jacket and wrapped her in a warm cashmere blanket, clucking with concern as she guided her to a plush sofa in front of a roaring fireplace. "I've taken the liberty of calling Dr. Evans," Arthur said, his tone all business now. "She's one of the best obstetricians in the city. She'll be here in 20 minutes just to make sure you and the baby are all right after the chill." Isabella could only nod, overwhelmed. A hot cup of chamomile tea was placed in her trembling hands. The warmth seeped into her bones, a stark contrast to the icy dread that had filled her just an hour ago. Once Dr. Evans had come and gone, confirming that both mother and baby were perfectly healthy, despite the scare Isabella and Arthur sat opposite each other in the quiet, book-lined library. The storm still raged outside, but in here, with the fire crackling and the scent of old paper and wood polish in the air, it felt a world away. "My father's share of the company. Isabella began, her voice hesitant. My mother told me he left us a trust. It was enough for our house, for my education. It was comfortable. Arthur leaned forward, his expression serious. Isabella, your mother was a wonderful woman, but she had a very different view of money than your father or I did. The trust she allowed you to access was merely the interest and dividends from a small fraction of the main portfolio. She was terrified that great wealth would corrupt you, that it would rob you of your ambition and character. She wanted you to find your own way. He rose and walked to a magnificent antique desk. He unlocked a drawer and pulled out a thick, leather-bound portfolio, placing it on the coffee table in front of her. Your father's original stake in the company was 40%. I own 60%. We were partners. Over the years, through stock splits, acquisitions, and reinvestments, that 40% has grown. After your mother passed, full control of the Marco Rossi family trust reverted to me as per your parents' will to be managed on your behalf until your 30th birthday, or at my discretion should circumstances require it. He opened the portfolio. Inside were pages of financial statements, stock certificates, and asset summaries. Isabella's eyes scanned the numbers, but her brain couldn't comprehend them. There were too many commas, too many zeros. I don't understand, she whispered, looking up at him. Let me be clear, Arthur said, his voice steady and kind. Julian Davenport is a millionaire. He likes to throw that word around. By most estimates, his net worth, which is mostly leveraged debt against his properties, is around $90 million. On a good day. He tapped the final page of the summary in the portfolio. Isabella, this trust, your trust, is currently valued at just over $4.7 billion. The air left Isabella's lungs in a rush. She felt lightheaded. Billion. With a B. It was a number so vast, so astronomical, that it seemed like a fantasy. All this time she had been living as Julian's dependent, walking on eggshells, terrified of his moods and his financial power over her, when all along she possessed a fortune that dwarfed his into insignificance. My entire life, she trailed off, her mind reeling. Your entire life, you have been who you are because of your character, not your bank account. And that is exactly what your parents would have wanted, Arthur said firmly. They would be so incredibly proud of the woman you've become. But they would be horrified by what that monster did to you tonight. The circumstances require it clause in the will has been met. As of this moment, you have full access to and control over your assets. He closed the portfolio. You are not a victim, Isabella. You are not a damsel in distress. You are one of the wealthiest women in this country. And you are my goddaughter. Julian Davenport didn't just kick his pregnant wife out of a car. He kicked the daughter of Marco Rossi out of a car, and he did it right in front of me. A cold, hard fury began to replace the shock in Isabella's heart. The humiliation, the fear, the years of subtle emotional abuse, it all coalesced into a single point of white-hot anger. Julian hadn't just insulted her. He had insulted the memory of her parents. He had preyed on what he perceived as her weakness and her lower status. What do we do? She asked, her voice no longer trembling. It was steady and hard as steel. Arthur's lips curved into a thin, grim smile. He looked less like a kindly old man, and more like the corporate titan he was, a shark who smelled blood in the water. First we rest, he said. Tomorrow I am making a call to Eleanor Croft. She is the most feared divorce attorney in the state of New York. She eats men like Julian for breakfast. Second, my forensic accounting team is going to start digging into Davenport properties. A man that arrogant and leveraged always has skeletons in his financial closets. We're going to find them." He leaned back in his chair, the firelight glinting in his eyes. "He wanted to ruin your evening, Isabella. We are going to ruin his entire life." Julian Davenport woke the next morning with a blinding headache and a sour taste in his mouth. He was in the guest room of his latest conquest, Tiffany Monroe, a vapid Instagram model whose primary ambition was to marry into wealth. The memories of the previous night were hazy. At first, then came rushing back with sickening clarity. The gala Sterling's interference, the fight with Isabella throwing her out of the car. A flicker of unease went through him. Maybe he had gone too far. A pregnant woman on the street in the rain. The optics, he had to admit, were terrible, if it ever got out. But then his arrogance reasserted itself. She would have called an Uber. She would have gone home crying. She'd be waiting for him right now, desperate to apologize, ready to do anything to get back in his good graces. She had nowhere else to go. He checked his phone. No missed calls from Isabella. No frantic texts. Strange. He sent a curt message. "I trust you've had time to reflect on your behavior. I'll be home this evening. We will discuss the terms of your apology then." He spent the day in a series of self-important meetings, the incident slowly fading from his mind. He was Julian Davenport. He moved on. Problems fixed themselves around him. He arrived back at the penthouse just after 7 p.m., striding into the marble foyer, expecting to find a contrite Isabella. Instead, the apartment was dark and silent. A thick, ominous envelope, with the insignia of a prestigious law firm, sat on the center of the glass dining table. His blood ran cold. He tore it open. Legal jargon swam before his eyes, but the words petition for dissolution of marriage, irreconcilable differences, and exclusive use and occupancy of the marital residence stood out in stark, terrifying relief. She was suing him for divorce, and demanding he be barred from his own home. He laughed out loud. The audacity. Her a penniless curator trying to take him on. She couldn't afford a real lawyer for more than an hour. This was a bluff, a pathetic, desperate cry for attention. He crumpled the letter and threw it in the trash. The next morning, his phone started ringing. It was his chief financial officer. "Julian, we have a problem," the CFO. A nervous man named David said without preamble. "First National just called in our note on the Hudson Yards project. They're demanding full payment within 30 days. "What?" "They can't do that. We have a rock-solid payment schedule," Julian barked. "They're citing a material change in risk clause. It's boilerplate, no one ever uses it." "Julian, who did you piss off?" The call came from the very top. The bank's chairman himself. Before Julian could answer, another call came through. It was his primary investment broker. "Julian, sell orders are flooding the market for Davenport Properties stock. It's down 15% in pre-market trading. Someone is shorting us into oblivion. It's a coordinated professional attack. I've never seen anything like it." Julian felt a wave of nausea. This was no coincidence. He stumbled over to his office window, looking down at the city below. Who had this kind of power? Who could cripple him with a few phone calls? And then the memory of the gala hit him like a freight train. Arthur Sterling, the man whose dinner invitation he had coveted for months, the man who had looked at him with such cold disappointment, the man Isabella had defended. He scrambled for his phone, his hands shaking, and called Isabella's number. It went straight to voicemail. He tried again. Voicemail. Meanwhile, in a sun-drenched suite at the Carlisle Hotel, Isabella was meeting with Eleanor Croft. Eleanor was a woman in her 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that radiated competence. Arthur sat quietly in a nearby chair, observing. Mr. Davenport's finances are, to put it mildly, a house of cards, Eleanor said, gesturing to a stack of files her team had already compiled. He presents as a titan, but he's leveraged to the hilt. Every building, every asset is mortgaged multiple times over. His stock is propped up by friendly analysts and aggressive punk. It's a classic bubble, and Mr. Sterling's associates, she said with a nod to Arthur, are currently providing the pin. Isabella felt a strange sense of detachment. This empire that had once intimidated her now seemed fragile and pathetic. "What do you want, Isabella?" Eleanor asked, her tone softening. "In a normal case, I'd say we go for half of the marital assets. But this isn't a normal case. Given his egregious conduct and your newfound financial independence, we can dictate the terms." Isabella looked at Arthur, who gave her an encouraging nod. She thought of the fear she had felt standing in the rain. She thought of the cold, dismissive look in Julian's eyes. She thought of her son growing inside her, a child she would never allow to be influenced by such a man. "I don't want his money," Isabella said, her voice clear and strong. "I have my own. I want him to have no claim to my child. No custody, no visitation. I want him to be completely and utterly out of our lives. And I want him to understand what he did." Eleanor Croft smiled. It was a terrifying sight. "I believe we can arrange that. We'll offer him a deal. He walks away, signs away all parental rights, and we let him keep whatever scraps he can salvage from his collapsing company. If he refuses, we release the security footage." "What security footage?" Isabella asked. Arthur spoke up for the first time. "The Rolls-Royce is equipped with a comprehensive security system, interior and exterior cameras, high-fidelity audio. I have a crystal-clear recording of the entire evening. From his first insult at the gala to the moment he shoved you out of the car, and I ordered him onto the street." He looked at Isabella, his eyes full of grim purpose. "The court of public opinion can be far more brutal than any judge, my dear. If he fights us, we won't just defeat him. We will erase him." The storm was no longer gathering. It had arrived. For Julian Davenport, the following 2 weeks were a masterclass in slow-motion demolition. Every pillar supporting his fragile empire was kicked out from under him methodically and mercilessly. The short-selling attack on his company's stock was relentless. What started as a 15% drop became 30%, then 50%. Margin calls he couldn't meet forced him to liquidate his personal holdings at a catastrophic loss. Whispers started circulating on Wall Street that Julian Davenport was a fraud, that his valuations were smoke and mirrors. The friendly analysts who had once sung his praises now issued panicked sell ratings to save their own credibility. His social life evaporated overnight. Invitations to gallery openings and charity dinners stopped arriving. Friends who had once slapped him on the back and laughed at his jokes now crossed the street to avoid him. He saw a picture in the New York Post of Tiffany Monroe on the arm of a grizzled hedge fund manager laughing on a yacht in St. Bart's. The caption read, "Trading up." He was a pariah. The final blow came during a desperate emergency meeting with his board of directors. He tried to project confidence to spin a story about a hostile market and a temporary downturn. But they all knew. They had seen the writing on the wall. In the middle of his presentation, his personal assistant entered the room. her face pale, and handed him a tablet. On the screen was a short 30-second video clip. It was grainy shot from the corner of a car's interior, but the subjects were unmistakable. It was him and Isabella. The audio was horrifyingly clear. "Get out of my car." His own voice, cold and cruel, filled the silent boardroom. He watched himself shove his pregnant wife out into the pouring rain. The clip ended. His phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "This is the discovery portion of the proceedings. The full 45-minute version is quite compelling. Your move, EC." He looked up at the faces of his board members. They were staring at him not with sympathy, but with pure, unadulterated disgust. His chairman, a man who had mentored him, slowly stood up, took off his glasses, and placed them on the table. "Julian," he said, his voice heavy with finality. "You're finished." That afternoon, Julian sat in the stark minimalist office of Eleanor Croft. He was a changed man. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed desperation. His bespoke suit seemed to hang off his frame. Eleanor slid a single document across the polished table. "The terms are simple, Mr. Davenport. You will relinquish any and all claims to Ms. Ross's assets, both now and in the future. You will sign away permanently and irrevocably all parental rights to the child. You will agree to a strict non-contact and non-disparagement order. In exchange, the video and the full findings of our forensic accounting team regarding your creative business practices will not be made public. You'll be left with whatever you can scrape together from the ashes." Julian stared at the paper, his hands trembling. He had lost everything. His company, his fortune, his reputation, all because of one single monstrous act of cruelty. All because he had underestimated the quiet woman he married and the silent man who drove his car. "Who is he?" Julian whispered, his voice hoarse. "The driver. Who is he?" Eleanor Croft allowed herself a small, cold smile. "He is a man who keeps his promises." With a shaking hand, Julian Davenport picked up the pen. He signed away his wife. He signed away his son. He signed away his life as he knew it. As he finished his signature, he finally broke, burying his face in his hands and letting out a dry, racking sob of a man who had nothing left. Across town, Isabella stood in an empty, sunlit room. It was the top floor of a building in the meat-packing district, with huge industrial windows overlooking the Hudson River. The space was vast and empty, a blank canvas. Arthur stood beside her, a blueprint unfurled in his hands. "The Rossi Gallery," he said, his voice filled with pride. "A space dedicated to discovering and promoting new artists, a legacy for your father, a future for you and your son." Isabella placed a hand on her stomach. The baby was kicking gently, peacefully. She looked out at the river, at the endless expanse of water and sky. The pain of Julian's betrayal was still there, a dull ache in her heart, but it was being overshadowed by a new, powerful feeling hope. She wasn't just a survivor. She was a creator, a builder. She was her father's daughter. And she was finally free. 2 months after the final papers were signed, in a quiet private room at Lenox Hill Hospital, with a panoramic view of the city she was reclaiming as her own, Isabella Rossi held her son for the first time. The world, which had for so long been a chaotic whirlwind of fear and uncertainty, narrowed to a single perfect point, the tiny wrinkled face nestled in the crook of her arm. He was beautiful, he was healthy, and he was hers. As his small hand instinctively curled around her finger, A wave of love so fierce and primal washed over her that it felt like it was rearranging her soul, healing the fractured pieces of her heart and cementing them back together, stronger than before. Arthur stood near the window, giving her space. He had been there for the entire ordeal, a silent, unshakable pillar of support in the waiting room, his usual corporate authority replaced by the anxious pacing of a soon-to-be grandfather. When the nurse had finally called his name, the relief on his face was a sight Isabella would never forget. "Have you decided on a name?" he asked softly, his voice thick with emotion. Isabella looked down at her son, whose dark tufts of hair were so like her own, and a sense of profound clarity washed over her. The name Davenport would never touch her child. It was a brand associated with cruelty, fragility, and failure. Her son deserved a name built on a foundation of love, strength, and integrity. "His name is Michael Rossi Sterling," she announced, her voice clear and firm. "Michael, because he will be strong and kind. Rossi, for the grandfather who would have adored him, the brilliant man whose legacy of passion we will carry on, and Sterling." She looked up at Arthur, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "For the man who kept his promise, the guardian who saved us both." Arthur Sterling, the billionaire titan who could make markets tremble with a single phone call, simply nodded, unable to speak, as he wiped a tear from his eye. In that moment, he was not a captain of industry. He was simply a godfather welcoming the next generation of a family he had sworn to protect. The following months settled into a rhythm of breathtaking, beautiful normalcy. The sterile art gallery-like penthouse with its oppressive silence was a distant nightmare. Life in the Gramercy Park brownstone was warm, alive, and filled with the gentle sounds of a new baby. Mornings were not dictated by the dread of Julian's moods, but by the soft coos of Michael from his bassinet, the smell of Mrs. Gable's coffee brewing, and the way the morning light filtered through the old library windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny golden sprites. Isabella would read art history texts aloud to her son, his wide, curious eyes following her as she spoke of Caravaggio's light and Bernini's marble. It was a life steeped in the genuine passions her father had instilled in her, a world away from the hollow pursuit of status that had defined her marriage. The final vestiges of her old life were shed with quiet finality. The divorce was unceremonious, a legal footnote to a story whose ending had already been written. As for Julian Davenport, his fall was as swift as it was complete. Isabella saw a small article buried deep in the business section one day. Davenport Properties had been fully dissolved, its assets auctioned off to satisfy a mountain of debt. The article mentioned that Mr. Davenport had relocated to pursue private interests in the Midwest. Isabella felt not a flicker of triumph, only a profound sense of pity for a man so hollow that once his wealth and image were stripped away, there was simply nothing left. He had become a ghost, an anecdote completely irrelevant to the vibrant, thriving world she was now building. That world had its grand opening on a crisp autumn evening. The Rossi Gallery was a triumph. Located in a beautifully renovated warehouse in the meatpacking district, it was all exposed, brick-polished concrete floors and soaring ceilings, the perfect canvas for the bold, electrifying art she had curated. The opening night was not the cold, social climbing affair Julian would have orchestrated. It was a celebration. The air buzzed with genuine excitement, filled not with billionaires competing for attention, but with a diverse crowd of passionate people, seasoned collectors, wide-eyed art students from NYU, critics from major publications, and the young nervous artists themselves, who Isabella greeted with hugs and words of encouragement. Isabella moved through the space with an effortless grace and confidence that turned heads. Dressed in a simple, elegant emerald green dress, she was no longer an accessory on a powerful man's arm. She was the central force in the room. She spoke with authority about a young painter's innovative use of impasto, debated the influences of German expressionism with a veteran critic, and gently guided a new collector toward a sculpture that spoke to them. This was her element. She wasn't just selling art. She was sharing its story, connecting artists with audiences, and building a community. In a quieter corner of the gallery, Arthur stood with Michael sleeping soundly in a baby carrier strapped to his chest. He was the picture of contentment, fielding compliments intended for Isabella and redirecting them with a proud, grandfatherly smile. "It's all Isabella," he would say. "She has her father's eye. Absolutely brilliant." Later, after the last guest had departed and the staff had gone home, Isabella stood with Arthur in the immense, silent gallery. The artworks on the walls seemed to hum with latent energy in the quiet. Baby Michael was now asleep in his stroller. "Your father," Arthur began, his voice echoing slightly in the vast space. "He would have stood right there." He pointed to a large, abstract canvas exploding with color, and he would have talked for an hour about the artist's courage. He never believed art was for decorating walls. He believed it was for starting conversations, for challenging the soul. Isabella walked over to the painting and gently touched the edge of the frame. "He used to tell me that every painting is a window into another person's world. Tonight I feel like I opened 100 windows." She turned back to Arthur, her heart overflowing with a gratitude so immense it was difficult to put into words. "None of this would be possible without you. You gave me back my life, Arthur." He shook his head, a warm smile on his face. "No, Isabella. I just opened a door. You had the courage to walk through it and build all of this yourself. I just kept a promise." He looked around the magnificent space at her name, Isabella Rossi, in elegant letters on the wall. "You've built something that will last. A legacy. The storm is over, my dear." Isabella looked at her son sleeping peacefully amidst the beauty she had created, and then at the kind, steady man who had been her guardian angel. The storm was indeed over. It had been a hurricane that had leveled her old life, but in its wake the ground was more fertile than ever before. And here in this new world she had built from love, passion, and resilience, she was finally planting her own garden. She was finally truly home. Isabella's story is a powerful reminder that our true worth is never defined by the people who try to diminish us. It's a story of hidden strengths, of silent guardians, and the incredible resilience of the human spirit. She was cast out, left alone in a storm. But she found that the storm was not meant to break her, but to clear a path for her true destiny. Her journey from a gilded cage of fear to a gallery filled with light and passion proves that the most powerful assets we have are not money or status, but courage, integrity, and the love of those who truly see us. If Bella's journey from heartbreak to triumph inspired you, please let us know in the comments below. What part of her story resonated with you the most? Your engagement helps us bring more stories like this to light. Don't forget to like this video if you believe in second chances and share it with someone who might need a reminder of their own strength. And of course, subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story of justice, resilience, and incredible transformation. Thank you for listening.